We need to talk about the Hulu documentary, The Secrets of Hillsong, because it reveals an all too familiar pattern inside the church world. A church or ministry rockets to success, but then over time, corruption seep in, leaders fall, a lot of people get really hurt, and skepticism about Christianity itself is fanned into flame. I've seen it before, most of you have too, and I know I'll see it again. How do you deal with the realities of those failures and keep your faith strong at the same time? Now, the documentary itself is 4 full episodes covering a lot of ground, from financial scandals to affairs to abuse of power issues, you name it. And I'm going to break my response down into those categories over a few videos and also include some thoughts about the producers themselves that I think are really important. Now, without a doubt, Hillsong has a lot of the criticism coming, but the producers of the documentary need to be analyzed as well. But for now, category 1 is the issue of fallen leadership, and in this case, his name is Carl Lentz. That's who's featured on the documentary. Now, the entire documentary is not about Carl, but it centers around him pretty significantly. Carl Lentz was the pastor of Hillsong, New York City, and very quickly became a pastor superstar. He became known as the pastor to the stars, and that was for a very good reason. He was exceptionally dynamic and a powerful preacher. During the documentary, even critics say he was very believable. The most common description of him during the documentary was that he was charming. He famously baptized Justin Bieber. Hillsong, New York was a phenomenon under Lentz's leadership, with lines waiting to get in the door, going down the block by the hundreds in New York, of all places. Lentz was even on Oprah. He was about as high up on the fame side as you could possibly get as a pastor of a church. But it all came crashing down when it came out that he had been having an affair, which led to it coming out that he had had another affair. There were also allegations of abuse of power, narcissism, favoritism, all leading to this overnight collapse. Now, why does that kind of thing happen? And how should you respond? It can be very disillusioning, and I'll use the word annoying. And I think we're given the answer about a third of the way through the second episode, which features Lentz prominently. A reporter makes a comment that, in my view, sums up the absolute core of why this happened and why it almost will always happen. Now, keep in mind, this is a reporter who started it by covering the church when it came to New York, and he was impressed by what he saw. Watch this.
I remember watching him and thinking there's no way what this requires can exist in the form of a man without that man breaking.
Now, presumably, this reporter was not even speaking as a believing person. He thinks this is great, but that's what led him to make this observation. If this level of emotional and spiritual high is what you're delivering week after week after week, service after service, and Lentz had reached a place of doing like 7 services on a weekend, it's very likely completely unsustainable. This man is going to break. Now, I want to be careful here. All of what I'm about to say is not a giant excuse for Carl Lentz's failings. To his credit, later in the film, he acknowledges all of this was his responsibility. But on the other hand, if you're not careful, you can make some very practical mistakes which open you up to being off balance and much more likely to fall. Please understand me here. I'm also not comparing myself to Carl Lentz. He saw levels of fame and impact I've never come close to touching, or for that matter, he saw levels of fame and impact virtually no other pastors have ever lived to see. But many of us have seen the same kind of thing in principle, just on a smaller scale. I've shared in our videos before that I've been a mega church pastor. So I've touched this experience during seasons where growth was fast-paced and exciting. People are packing out your room. They come in enthusiastic, and the environment is electric. It seems like your preaching is being connected with on these deep levels. It's called momentum. And everyone can tell when you have it, and everyone can tell when you don't have it. Now, when you have it, it's fun. It's super exciting, but it brings with it some very powerful temptations. The first temptation is to always wonder, how do I keep this going? And you find yourself doing this mix of genuinely seeking God, but also seeking to keep that magic alive. You become obsessed with sustaining and gaining momentum. It feels too good to watch it lag. And that's what's tragic. I believe in Carl's case, like so many others, he started very sincerely. That's where the momentum came from originally. He talked about how he and his wife would take Bibles to dance clubs and give them to the DJs and the workers. They wanted to reach the people in New York City. They had people coming who had never been to church or had given up on church a long time ago. They were hitting the target on a massive level. They started reaching actors and sports stars. They became the place to be. But there's this strange line that starts getting blurred between your ego and your spiritual devotion. Now, why it works this way, I don't know, but sometimes great preachers can get way in over their skis because their giftedness outweighs their character, experience, and maturity. I've seen it happen on a smaller scale, but the principle's the same. You have someone who can deliver a powerful sermon, the crowd is moved, but the life experience and depth of character can't keep up with the accolades and the leadership demands it places on someone. Now, here's what I know. These fails are almost always a failure on what we would call the spiritual side, but also on the practical side. See, we're spiritual, we're mental, emotional, relational, and physical creatures. If you're not taking care of all of those aspects of life, I don't care how great of a preacher you are, you're in serious danger. I think of King David when the chapter which tells about his affair with Bathsheba starts this way. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. David's first mistake was a very practical one. He was not doing what he should have been doing. When everyone else was off fighting battles, he was literally sitting home in the days before TV, internet, big crowd sporting events, even good novels for that matter. He was idle. He was alone wandering around his house, and he notices a woman. The rest is history. This doesn't excuse Carl Lentz, but it should warn us that some of the best and brightest can and will fail if they have too much responsibility without accountability. They have too much celebration without the right amount of grounded evaluation, and too much work without the right amount of refreshing. And no one is immune. And some of the most successful, hard-hitting ministries can be wide open for some devastating takedowns. So, how should we as believers respond to this kind of thing when it happens? One, keep in mind, while it seems common, it feels that way more because of technology. We have exposure on the scale that we do. We see what's going on around the world. Two, there are churches and ministries that have made it just fine. There are great places with people who have maintained their integrity. Now, Billy Graham is the most often used example, but he's a good one because he preached face to face with more people than any other person in history. He counseled with presidents. He was invited to all kinds of celebrity type things, and based upon what we know now, he never fell. Number three, if you're in leadership at a church, be careful of what level of responsibility you give to young and vibrant talent without the appropriate levels of responsibility. Four, follow the practical rules. Rules like Billy Graham's famous, I never meet alone with someone of the opposite sex. Now, it gets made fun of, but it kept Billy Graham from being Carl Lentz. Now, I promise you, spiritual failure always begins with what I call practical failure. And five, remember, the Bible is under no illusions about our capacity to sin. That's the whole point. Every leader you've ever followed, every believer you've ever loved is someone who needed to be died for. And so sometimes we act like it. I hope that helps. See you next time.